Io direi che a questo punto darei la parola ad Antonio. Antonio, I think you are here. I saw you somewhere. Yes.
Yes.
No. I hope you were able to catch some of the presentation from Angela, and now the floor is yours.
Thanks.
You should share if you have any slide on your own. I think you're... Okay,
yes,
done. Fantastic.
We
can see it.
Okay. It should be loading now. Let's see. So, are you already seeing it?
Sta cargando, sì. It's there.
Perfect. Okay, so thank you very much, Juliana and Angela, for the invitation. As you commented, I work at the Internet Interdisciplinary Institute, and we have, in the last few years, one of the projects that we have been pushing forward is Decidim. Decidim is a digital platform for participatory democracy. And basically for us, it's like what we call a political network that somehow helps or tries to help us to advance towards. And to begin with the diagnostic of some of the problems that we have today with regard to our current predicament, we like to stress two aspects. On the one hand, the crisis of democracy, which has been analyzed at least since the 90s in different academic literatures. And out of that, as we will see, there were different movements in the last decade that have been precisely denouncing this crisis of democracy and calling for alternatives. And on the other, a key element, let's say, like a factor in the last few decades too, has been the development of digital networks and all that has came with that extension of platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, more recently, TikTok, Instagram, etc. And the potential that has to impact politics. So when it comes to how Decidim came to be born, which I think is an example of the connection between civil society and public institutions, and also, like broader historical processes of change, I think it's relevant to stress 50mem as part of the origin of Decidim in several senses, because of the many hacktivists and hacker groups that were part of the movement and in technological terms, but also because of the ideas about transforming democracy and the limits of the representative democracy that were raised by the 50mem movement, the Indignados movement back in 2011. As a result of the political cycle opened by 50mem, there were different political parties, and also at the state level, but also at the municipal level. And back in 2015, in May 2015, 4 years after many of the camps of the 50mem movement, many of these new parties won the majorities of key cities such as Madrid and Barcelona. And as part of that collaboration, in many cases of networks that have been built at least since 50mem, there were many actors that began to collaborate with the city councils in order to build these new platforms for participatory democracy. In broader terms, in terms not so much local, but talking about these different types of networks that have been emerging at least in the last 3 decades, we like to think that the early days of the World Wide Web, it was mostly a time of, this obviously a simplification, but a time of informational networks where the core was mostly about information sharing, and not so much what came afterwards, which was this idea of strong interaction, likes, opinions, etc. And especially also how to extract data out of that, incorporate platforms and incorporate social networks such as Facebook and Twitter. As an alternative, other models such as Consul, which was a platform similar to Decidim developed in Madrid, and then Decidim itself, is what we like to call political networks, where the center is not the information, and neither the mere interaction between the actors that use the platform, but rather the constitution of a collective agency. The stress on deliberation, the stress on collective decision-making, and ultimately into the constitution of a we. And that's at the very name of the platform, because Decidim in Catalan means we decide. The infrastructure, the software, the Decidim software allows you, through different modules to construct a very wide variety of potential participatory processes, from participatory budgeting to consultation, debates, etc. So that's one of the key features as well. The idea that it's not just a single tool, but rather like a toolkit for very different, needs, or an association or a state could have to try to articulate some of its processes in a more democratic manner. And in this case, Decidim is now used by more than 500 organizations worldwide, more than 1 million people using it. And it goes from cities such as Mexico City, New York City, or Helsinki, states like the French state, or even the Italian state has been also deploying it at different scales, but and more recently also the European Union, the European Commission, on a process on the future of Europe. And also very different actors also coming from civil society and also cooperatives. And right now in Barcelona, it has more than 120,000 participants and more than 50 processes. And I want to stress two aspects, at least with regard to Decidim. One is the potentialities that it has to democratize politics and even broader social processes in different social organizations. And then I will go into the elements that it can show when it comes to the question of democratizing technology itself. So going first into some of the paradigmatic cases of use of Decidim, probably one of the biggest cases is the first that was run in the first mandate of Barcelona en Comú here in Barcelona in 2016, where 40,000 people participated with more than 10,000 proposals, more than 500 face-to-face meetings, and very much like an idea of hybridizing online and offline participation. It's very relevant to think that this is not about digital democracy, but rather about hybrid democracy that connects the online and the offline in the, to try to exploit the best potential in each of those modalities of participation. And in this early process, the idea was that Barcelona into a, let's say, a roadmap for the mandate, which is called usually a municipal strategy plan. So what they turned it into was into 1,200 proposals that were put into Decidim Barcelona, which is like the website of Barcelona based on the Decidim software. And then they opened those 1,200 proposals to debate among citizens, and also for the citizens to make their own proposals and debate their own proposals. And then the result was that citizens created more than 9,000 new proposals. And in the end, the process generating 10,160 proposals that were ultimately more than incorporated in different policy measures that ultimately were structured in 5,000 projects throughout the mandate. And the key idea is that now you go to Decidim and you can still check the level of accomplishment of each of those single proposals according to different angles, be it by district or also by the topic. And then going more into more general vision of what this implies is this idea that beyond elections or beyond the interaction that the citizenry can have with the politicians through social media, the key idea is that Decidim allows as an interface to have a new space for deliberation with political representatives, but also to intervene into different aspects of public administration. Another key element, when we go beyond the state and more into democratic governance in any kind of organization, we like to think of it more in terms of systems theory, and then the idea that any kind of organization can use in the platform in order to run through the process that goes from perception of a given problem, definition of a set of objectives, the generation of ideas and debates around those ideas, then the decision and selection of some of them, then the execution, and then the following up of the execution of those proposals. Then there has been different limits as well. Different studies has been run in the early deployments of the CDIM that showed some of its potentials and also some of its limits, also some of its menaces, when it comes to things that go from the digital divide that somehow still is present in many cases, up to the fact of whether there are enough resources for public institutions to process all the inputs that such a platform can, in some cases, generate. I will not go into detail in all of them, but just mention those two. Then there is, beyond the question of democratizing political or social processes, there is specifically something coming from the hacktivist community and hacker tradition, which is the idea of democratizing technology too, which is relevant not just for the CDIM, but also in thinking in terms of the digital platforms in which we run much of our lives today. And in this case, the basic principle of the CDIM is public money, public code, of course, not a corporation coming and giving a service to the public administration, but rather generating a software that is free software, that is open for anyone to reuse, and that also by the collaboration between different institutions can optimize public money. Beyond developing the software, a key element of what we also tried to build around it was a community around it. A community that was not a community only of hackers or only of people that are technologically proficient, but also a community that has face-to-face meetings and also research meetings that try to incorporate people from the academia, but also common citizens, public servants, people from activism, etc. Right now that we have a website that is called the meta.decidim.org, and there are more than 7,000 members there. And there are many cases debates about the features of the project and the future of the whole, endeavor. And we have, as I said, face-to-face meeting and also online meetings. With the pandemics, we had to drastically reduce the face-to-face, but we will be probably recovering it soon. And then we have also like a yearly meeting, which is more like a festival. So basically, we have tried to nurture a community around the project. And then there are different aspects of how this works in terms of how new proposals for the redesign of the software can be put forward. And then there is this general idea of trying to move from not only proprietary software or private software to free software, but also from free software to what we like to call democratic software. And then just to conclude, this general vision of how in many cases see the digital society, in the sense that we can, when it comes to the question of governing things like our data, the production of goods and services, we try to play with a double axis. One of actors that are either centralized or decentralized, and actors that can be either public or private. And then you have the states, you have the big corporations, you have these new forms of distributed economy. You can go from things like Airbnb up to new things like cryptocurrencies or DAOs. And then you have things like the commons, the solidarity economy, etc. And how the people are somehow at the center of these different models of governing the production of data, goods, and services in the digital society. Much of what we have to do, what we have today is like big corporations like Facebook or Google dealing with our data, in many cases defining the rules of social relationships and ultimately defining how we relate to each other, in many cases also encroaching with the state, etc., etc. And I think that the model that we are trying to nurture is this one, in which the center, through projects like the CDIM or another ones that we have also been carrying on in the last years, Decode, is this idea of trying to connect the people with the public institutions, and then also all these alternative forms of organizing economy with the cooperatives, with social and solidarity economy, etc. And ultimately, it's that model what we think that can contribute to into this idea that with which I begin, which is to answer to the double question of the crisis of democracy and also the potential rise of datacracy, and to answer to this, to the current challenge into a model, towards a model of a radically democratic digital society. We are certainly very, very far from that, but that's one of the visions that we have for the CDIM, and hopefully we will get some advances in the forthcoming years. So thank you very much.
Eccomi, thanks a lot, Antonio. I was writing in the mirror some of the keywords that you are giving us that I think will be useful also when we will discuss at the end of the workshop today. As I know that Antonio can stay with us all the afternoon, if there is any specific point for him, please raise your hand, Angela. I can see your hand. and we can have like 10 minutes more to discuss with Antonio, and then we let him go.
Yeah, our question is about okay, the project and the whole presentation is very clear. I have a question related to the process, because it could be that to I don't know, summarize all these incredible experiences and works in 20 minutes. I know one question is about, are you, so this kind of platform in order to foster or improve the democracy, the decision making, is mostly focused in the decision making, or, for instances, one of these for using the Barcelona example. So one of these project proposed, so they, with this platform, provide like a support to have like a shared decision-making process, then it is defined. This is the selected project. And then after, during the implementation or the monitoring, this kind of platform can support also to, in some way, make the transparency, the accountability of during the implementation of this process selected, because this is another, in my opinion, a big issue or big challenge that we have working with this kind of co-production and co-design. So try to understand how we can, in some way, identify the benefit and then the whole process. Okay.
So I think that in principle, yes, but the challenge is mostly, usually these processes are socio-technical. So you have an element which is the decidim, but the key challenge is to have the people, to have also the kind of training that you need. That's the real challenge. We provide something that can be in principle useful, but of course there are many other aspects that are, you know, like. So
allora, sono Angela Colucci, apro velocemente.
Sorry?
No, nothing.
Okay, so yes, so that's the issue. So in principle, yes, but the issue is that you have to be very careful, you know, in the kind of socio-technical system that you have to build for that to actually work. So the technology doesn't solve the, you know, like, it's not the solution. You have actually to build a whole system in which the technology is a relevant part, but there are many other elements that in most cases are actually much more relevant than the technology itself.
Thanks.
Anyone else?
Potete fare anche in italiano.
Sì, scusate.
Sono io che...
Traduciamo noi se vai.
Sì, e comunque piano, capisci? Sì.
Okay, if not, maybe, so I speak in Italian, sorry.